Unit 1, Part 5. In this part, I'll review the 5 rules of language. Part 5 corresponds to slide 76 to 102. So this is a review slide describing the 5 rules of language. First, there's the form or the structural components of language. These are the rules of phonology. Think phoneme. Then there are rules of morphology. Think morpheme. I'll give you that definition in a moment. And then there are rules of syntax. So think grammatical categories such as nouns, verbs, adjectives. Think grammatical phrases, sentences, and questions. Then there is the content or the meaning carried by language. These are rules of semantics. And finally, there is the use of language or the purposes served by language in the social setting, and these are the rules of pragmatics. Let's start with phonology, and let's define phoneme again. What is a phoneme? A phoneme is the smallest linguistic unit of sound that signals a change or a difference in meaning, such as a B versus a P, or an S versus a Z, or a T versus D. Phonological rules govern phonemes and their location and combination in syllables and words. That is, each language has a set of rules as to how phonemes, or speech sounds, can be sequenced into syllables and into words. A quick reminder of the definition of syllable: it is a consonant plus vowel or vowel plus consonant combination. Phonemes of a language are finite. There's only so many, and English has about 43 phonemes that are categorized as either consonant, vowel, or diphthong, and I will give you the definition of diphthong in a moment. Let's look at this table from the book, and it is on pages 283 and 284. This table shows all of the English phonemes, which are categorized into categories of consonants, vowels, and diphthongs. And here is the definition of diphthong. A diphthong is the combination of 2 vowels produced together quickly, as in the diphthong oi for the word toy or boy. So here this table presents actually the phonetic symbols for all of the English phonemes. Don't worry about these symbols for this class. You'll learn all about them when you take phonetics. There are 2 sets of phonological rules we'll describe: distributional rules and sequencing rules. Let's look first at distributional rules. These rules describe which sounds can appear in which word position. For example, in English, the NG phoneme, which I actually also included here, the phonetic symbol of that NG phoneme, is permitted to be in the medial word position in English, as in the word finger, and in the final word position, as in the word long, but not in the initial word position. Then there are sequencing phonological rules that describe which sounds can be combined together. So, for example, in English, the VL combination is not combined, but is allowed to be combined in Russian, such as in the word Vladimir. The next language rule we'll talk about is morphology, which are rules that dictate the internal organization of a word. So remember, we're at the word level. Morphology refers to the relationship of a word to its smaller parts, such as prefixes and suffixes, as units of meaning. Morphological rules govern the internal organization of words. Let's define morpheme again. Oh, I'm sorry. This is our very first time defining the word morpheme, and here is your definition. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in a language. So, examples. The word radio or bed or calendar, each are one morpheme. They are also known as free morphemes since they can stand alone. Then we have words like reading or walked or eats or books or boys or fastest, bigger and happy, quickly. Each of these examples are two morphemes, since there are now smaller units, prefixes and suffixes, added to the free morpheme, and those prefixes and suffixes are meaningful and now modify the meaning of the word. So here's a figure from Chapter 4, page 157, that we'll look at again later in the class. I wanted, though, just to introduce this to you now. And it describes the different types of morphemes. And you'll see that there are free morphemes, such as cat and boy and bed. And there are bound morphemes that act as suffixes and prefixes. Take a closer look at the morphemes that are circled under bound inflectional, such as the past tense ed and the plural s. These are very important. These morphemes that are circled, that are bound inflectional, these morphemes are known as early grammatical morphemes. These grammatical morphemes are acquired early during language development. They modulate meaning and are bound inflectional morphemes. They include tense markers, such as the present progressive ing, the regular past tense ed. They include a person marker, such as third person singular s, as in he walks. They include a number marker, such as adding the plural s morpheme, and they include possession, such as the possessive s morpheme, as in girls' ball. Now, here's a table of the 14 grammatical morphemes that are tracked during language development. This is from your book, page 177. We'll be looking at this again later in the class. Just remember now that the production of grammatical morphemes by the young child is a major milestone in language development. And you'll see, again, these 14 grammatical morphemes that are being tracked. That include the present progressive ing, the preposition in, the preposition on, the regular plural s, as well as others. And we'll be looking at this again later in the class. So now let's talk about syntax, which is sentence level organization. So we're moving now from the word level to the sentence level, and syntactic rules govern the ways in which words, so now think parts of speech, such as nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, in which those parts of speech are combined using correct word order to form grammatical units of phrases, clauses, and sentences. So, phrases include noun phrases, verb phrases, and others such as prepositional phrases, infinitive, gerund, and participial phrases. Don't worry, we'll be describing and defining these later in the class. But for now, just as an introduction, let's take a look at a noun phrase such as the big boy, and know that this phrase is created by combining parts of speech, an article, an adjective, and a noun together and in this word order to form this grammatical noun phrase. Let's take a look at the verb phrase is running and know that it's created by the correct ordering of the uncontractable auxiliary helping verb is plus the verb root run plus the present progressive grammatical morpheme ing for a grammatical verb phrase is running. So syntax includes units of phrases as well as units of clauses, and clauses are described as either being a main or independent clause or a subordinate dependent clause, and we'll be looking a little more at clauses in a moment. And syntax also then includes the ordering of our parts of speech into phrases, clauses, and sentences. And sentences are classified according to either the sentence type or the sentence structure. So sentence type basically refers to the function that the sentence serves, and this includes a declarative function, interrogative, imperative, and exclamatory functions. So declarative sentence states a fact or makes an assertion, including a negation. So an example is the big boy is running, the big boy is not running. An interrogative sentence are questions, and you can have a yes/no question such as is the big boy running, or a WH question such as when is the big boy running. And then there are imperative sentences and exclamatory sentences. Just know that these sentence types are further defined with more examples in Unit 6. And also, as an aside, in the class, we'll be tracking development of these sentence types, but our labeling system will be as follows: declarative sentences, negative sentences, yes/no questions, and WH questions. And these are the specific sentence types that have been tracked to look at early syntactic development. So now let's look at the 4 sentence structures that we'll also be tracking as part of syntactic development in the class. So first there is the simple sentence structure. This sentence contains at least one main or independent clause, and that is one subject and one verb, where the clause can stand alone. It's a complete thought, such as the big boy is running. Then there's a compound sentence structure, and this sentence structure contains at least 2 independent clauses that are joined or conjoined by a coordinating conjunction, such as for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So in this example, the dog is sleeping and Scott is exercising. We have subject, verb, and the dog is sleeping is an independent clause. It can stand alone. Scott is exercising is an independent clause. It too can stand alone, but when they're conjoined with and, the dog is sleeping and Scott is exercising, we have a compound sentence. And just as a preview, the child's ability to create compound sentences such as this is a developmental syntactic milestone and is described as clausal conjoining seen during Brown's stage 5. And just as an aside, there is more to come in Unit 5, Part 3, about the linguist Roger Brown and his major contribution for how we track syntactic development. Then there is a complex sentence, and this sentence contains one or at least one dependent or subordinate clause that cannot stand alone, which is embedded with one independent main clause by a subordinating conjunction, such as because, instead, until, if, and while. So here the example, the dog is sleeping when Scott is exercising. Our main independent clause is the dog is sleeping. That is embedded with the subordinating clause that cannot stand by itself when Scott is exercising. Also, as another preview, the child's ability to create complex sentences is also a developmental syntactic milestone and is described as clausal embedding, which is seen during Brown's stage 4. And last, there is the compound complex sentence structure, and this sentence has 2 or more main clauses and 1 or more subordinate clause. So in this example, the dog is sleeping and Scott is exercising when Mary goes to work. When Mary goes to work is a dependent subordinate clause, cannot stand by itself, that is embedded with the compound sentence, the dog is sleeping and Scott is exercising. So this sentence structure, you can see it's pretty complicated. It's long, and it is seen during post-Brown stage 5, which we'll be talking about in the near future, when the child is about 4 years of age and older. Let's now talk about semantics, which are rules that are concerned with word meaning and sentence meaning. Semantic rules govern word meaning, and this basically refers to our vocabulary. It includes confrontational naming, which is being shown a picture and asked to name it, and higher level word knowledge, such as knowing synonyms. For example, glad and happy mean the same, or antonyms, hot and cold are opposites, or being able to give a definition, or words that are associated, or category labels. Semantic rules also govern the meaning of individual sentences and sentence sequences. You want what you say to make sense and be meaningful. And lastly, semantic rules include non-literal or figurative language meanings, such as being able to use idioms and metaphors, proverbs, jokes, and riddles. Here are some examples of non-literal meanings, such as a metaphor, he's as big as a barn, an idiom, it's raining cats and dogs, and a proverb, don't put all your eggs in one basket. The thing to remember about non-literal meanings is that they mean something different than what each specific word in the sentence implies. So, for example, in English, when we say this idiom, it's raining cats and dogs, we basically are saying it's raining really heavily, not that cats and dogs are falling from the sky. Another thing to remember about non-literal and figurative language is that it can be language and culture specific. So, for example, a native Spanish speaker may not know what the English idiom, it's raining cats and dogs, means. And now we're on the final rule system, which are pragmatic rules. These rules govern the use of language in the social context. That is, the use of socially appropriate language. Pragmatic rules allow us to participate in efficient conversations across different settings and with different communicative partners. Pragmatic rules include the use of communicative intentions, speech styles, and discourse rules and obligations. What are communicative intentions? These are the speaker's purposes or reasons for communicating, such as communicating to request information, to provide information, to protest, to joke, to scold. What is meant by speech style? First, know that speech style is influenced by the social context that you are in. And when you change your speech style, it shows that you're socially aware and sensitive. Speech style means that you change what you communicate and how you communicate depending on the social context. That is, you alter your language, your vocabulary, your syntax, as well as your paralinguistic cues and your non-linguistic cues, depending on who you're talking to, your communicative partner, where you are, your social setting, and your intentions or your reasons for communicating. Here's an example of changing your speech style as influenced by the social context. So, you want to communicate the same message in two different situations. And the message is that you're cold and you want the heat on. So when I'm home or you're home, you can say to your husband, I'm freezing, turn on the heat. This is a direct request for action. Turn on the heat now. Another example, you're at work and you might say to your office mate, it's really cold in here and I forgot my sweater. Do you mind if I put the heat on? Just let me know if you get too hot and I'll turn it off. So here, it's not a direct request for information. It's not a direct request for action. I'm sorry. You're just trying now to provide information and to get an agreement from your listener. So also under Pragmatics are discourse rules and obligations. We follow rules during discourse or conversations, and these rules are important for the coordination and the organization of the conversation. Discourse rules are or include rules for how to open and close a conversation, take a conversational turn, introduce a topic, maintain the topic, change the topic, terminate or end the topic of a conversation, ask for clarifications. And then there is the cooperation principle or our obligations as speakers. So as speakers, during a conversation, we have obligations to be clear, informative, relevant, and truthful in order to have a good, coherent, organized conversation. So let's conclude part 5 now by defining linguistic competence and communicative competence as we re-highlight the 5 language rules. Linguistic competence refers to our tacit knowledge about the rules of our native language, phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. And even though we can't define these rules, and you couldn't define these rules before the class, you still knew when a rule was violated or when it was used incorrectly. And the typical 4-year-old already demonstrates linguistic competence. Communicative competence now includes linguistic competence as well as pragmatic and social knowledge. This refers to our underlying tacit knowledge of how to use language to effectively communicate in different social settings. So now we've included all 4 prior language rules and now the pragmatic rules, and the typical 4-year-old also demonstrates communicative competence. So we are now at the end of Unit 1, Part 5, and you should now be able to answer the following learning objectives for Part 5. You should be able to define the 5 language rules. You should be able to explain behaviors and skills that are subsumed under each rule. You should be able to define morpheme, define phoneme, define linguistic competence, and define communicative competence.